All right. Our movie for today is Detroit 9000, which came out in 1973. And being from Detroit, I have to tell you, I love this movie for what it represents. It's a lot of Detroit from the 1970s, and it is pretty awesome. The gist of it, or the overview, is what basically happens is this ball or political fundraiser is robbed, and there's this black and white cop duo who have to solve the case. That's the premise of the movie in and of itself. Now, in this movie, who you have starring is you got Harry Rhodes and Alex Rocco playing Harry Rhodes plays Sergeant Jesse Williams. He's the black cop. And then you got Alex Rocco, who you may know as Mo Green from The Godfather, as Lieutenant Danny Bassett. And a little interesting note about Alex Rocco is, dude actually spent time in prison on I don't know if it was manslaughter or murder, but he was actually in prison, man. So he's true. I've seen him play gangster roles in other movies, but dude was a true gangster. But anyway, Harry and Jesse are the lead characters, black and white cop who have to solve this caper that went down. Also in this movie, you have the beautiful Vanetta McGee, man. And I mean, just look at that picture right there. That says it all. She's one of the gorgeous Blaxploitation beauties from the era. Vanetta died pretty young, I believe, and but she did some great movies. She was in Shav's Big Score. She did Bucket, not Thomasine and Bushrod with Max Julian, and for a while, her and Max Julian were dating. Who you also have in this movie is this dude, which you may know by face. His name is Rudy Challenger. Rudy plays Congressman Aubrey Clayton. I'll tell you more about what went on in the movie, but you may recognize him from, he was in Hitman with Bernie Casey. He was in Cool Breeze. He played Pam Grier's father in Sheba Baby. He was in The Slams. So a little Blaxploitation, nice little Blaxploitation resume. And then my main man, not a lot of scenes, but again, I always have to give respect to whom respect is due, and that is the great Scatman Carruthers, which Scatman wasn't a big Blaxploitation dude. He paid Pops in Black Belt Jones, but he was, or he was also in Silver Streak with Eddie or Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. But Scatman just, and I think the I think Scatman also did voiced one of the characters in Coonscan. He might have been Barry White was the bear, Philip Michael Thomas was the rabbit. So I have to look it up. But yeah, Scatman Carruthers was in Coonskin too. But Scatman from way back, probably more so prior to the 70s. But he played the Reverend in this movie. So Detroit 9000 is this movie, man, is very raw and gritty in terms of the violence and what went down. So basically, here's the 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 premise and plot of this thing. Congressman Aubrey Hill Clayton, the dude that I just showed you, Rudy Challenger, he's running for governor. Well, it starts out with this ball. It's just like you just think it's just a ball, a nice event going on in Detroit. But then Congressman Clayton announces that he's going to be running for governor. And then the ball winds up getting robbed. So this crew comes in masked up and rip off the ball. And then, we cut to the reporters chastising the Detroit Police Department for not having any coverage at the ball because they were like, hey, if this was a white event, you'd have probably had cops there and all this and that. So what happens is Lieutenant Danny Bassett, Alex Rocco, the white cop, he gets put on the case. And then while doing some searching, DPD, Detroit Police Department, finds criminals. They find their getaway van abandoned. So then we cut to a totally different scene. And in this scene, you got Sergeant Jesse Williams, the black cop. He's checking in on a suspect, on an apartment with suspect. And then what this leads to is a shootout where one of the cops gets killed. And ultimately, what happens is there's this radio show called Buzz the Fuzz where the police are on the radio with this radio host and they call in to find out. So through this, Detective, um, excuse me, Sergeant Williams, Lieutenant Bassett, they get paired up together, not to the chagrin of Danny Bassett. He really doesn't want to work with Jesse Williams, but he's kind of forced to do so. And so they pair up on the case. Side note is uh, this kind of plays into the story somewhat, but uh, Lieutenant Bassett's wife, she's a racist wench, but she's in a sanitarium, and so he goes to visit her, and she wants him to do some dirty stuff to get her out. And the reason I call her racist is because she refers to the blacks that are in the sanitarium taking care of her as jigaboos. We have a town here near Detroit, called Hamtramck, which is back in the day. I don't know if I think it's kind of shifted, but way back in the day, there was a heavy Polish population in Hamtramck. And so, in referencing Hamtramck, she calls them Polacks and stuff. So, anyway, and doing their, investigation and all this stuff, Jesse finds out that Congressman Clayton's right hand man wasn't really too keen on him running for governor. So they wind up chasing some leads. They hit this brothel that, is the madam or the proprietor of this brothel is a friend of Sergeant Williams. Or no, no, no. She's a friend of Lieutenant Bassett of Alex Rocco. And so they try to find out more about the culprits in this robbery of the ball. But in the midst of them talking to the madam, one of the prostitutes, who is Roby, played by Vanetta McGee, she sees the cops talking to them, and she actually knows Jesse Williams from back in the day. So she kind of hides out. And so through all of this, Williams and Bassett go on a stakeout, while checking on another lead. They've recognized that they're being watched and followed. And then on the side note with Roby, the prostitute, her pimp, this dude named Ferdy, played by Herb Jefferson, he actually was in on the caper. So she calls him and says, "Hey, the cops are, trying to get onto this." And he's like, "Hey, don't just be cool, baby. Keep me out of this," type of deal. The dudes that were part of the caper, they wind up ultimately killing Roby. And right as the dudes rough her up and kill her, Bassett and Williams roll up on the scene, and then Williams talks to Roby and they kind of reminisce and all this good stuff. She gives him some info about what went down. She gives him the backstory, which basically she says, "Hey, Congressman Clayton, he was a trick." And she overheard him talking about the fundraiser. So that's what she told Ferdy. Ferdy told the gang. They ripped them off and all this. So then what happens towards the end is, police kill the gang. They apprehend Ferdy. They are going to go back to Ferdy's place to get the loot from the thing. But through all of this, now Jesse has Ferdy, and Danny Bassett would kind of went off on his own thing. Turns out he went and got to Ferdy's place first, took the loot, and was going to make off with it. And then at the end, there's this like super long shootout deal. But at the very end, what tends to happen is Jesse catches up with Danny with the loot. Danny winds up getting shot, and Jesse's basically trying to find out from him, "Man, were you gonna turn that loot in like a good cop, or were you gonna basically abscond with it and run off and do your own thing?" And Danny never answers. So at the very end of the movie, it leaves Jesse kind of wondering and contemplating, is was he a really good cop that he knew to where the stuff was going to be, and one of the best cops ever that was going to get the stuff and turn it in, or was he one of the worst cops ever that he was going to do some dirty stuff? So that's, kind of a lot of the stuff that went down in this movie. But like I said, the thing I love about it is how much it truly represented Detroit. And so And a couple of things about this movie is director Arthur Marks. He was in the last episode we talked about the Monkey Hustle. He directed Monkey Hustle. He directed also Bucktown, Friday Foster with Pam Grier, and JD's Revenge. But like I said in the last episode, I said Arthur Marks, he didn't really use Hollywood studios as much as he shot on location in the cities where the films were. And that is evident and prevalent throughout this movie. I mean, being from Detroit, even though this is from 1973, I was only 2 at the time, but a lot of the stuff in the movie I can see, and I remember back from when I was growing up, some of the the buildings, the locations, and things like that. So it's just a true testament to shooting in Detroit. That's one of the nice things about this. Um, they use real Detroiters in the movie. So, for example, the Buzz the Fuzz radio host is Martha Jean the Queen Steinberg, who was a huge radio host during the 70s and 80s back here in Detroit. So she's one. There's a Woody Willis, who was one of our newsmen here. He plays a role in the movie. Dick Burton, who's a radio host, and the real police chief at the time, the Chief John Nichols, was played himself in the movie. He had a role, and then they used a lot of real Detroit police resources, like the harbor master, which is the boat on for the scenes on the water. They used the equestrian unit, so the horses, cars. So it was just real Detroiters, real locations in the movie, and that was pretty cool. The movie in and of itself, I'm not sure how popular it was when it came out in 1973, but the movie gained cult status because it is a favorite of Quentin Tarantino. If you hear Quentin Tarantino said he loved Blaxploitation movies, but this was one of the ones that he really enjoyed, so much so that in 1998 he re-released this movie under, he was doing this production company called Rolling Thunder Pictures, I believe it was, and he was kind of re-releasing some old movies, and Detroit 9000 was one of those, and it kind of gained a new cult following at that point. Now, like I said, the movie is gritty and raw. It's a lot of violence and stuff in here. I mean, there's a gun battle in there that's like 15 minutes long. I was like, at some point, I was like, when is this thing going to be over? But although it's very gritty and violent, one of the things is the blood in this movie is it's so uh, it's so obviously fake that it's laughable when you look at some of the blood on the people. It's like, dude, what is that? But again, it portrays Detroit as very gritty and raw, so much so to the point that the mayor at the time, Mayor Roman Gribbs, from what I saw, it said he blasted the production team on this movie as a garbage organization that produced a garbage movie because he was so upset with how Detroit was portrayed in the movie. So, but again, looking back on it from a historical perspective, Blaxploitation movie, I think it's great and a definite watch.